Hey guys, welcome back to the Everything Real Estate Show. Really excited today. I have Ben Rabidoux of Edge Analytics joining me on the podcast. If you don't know Ben, he's a pretty regular guest on many shows across Canada. I know about him just from the Looney Hour, which I always love listening to. Shout out to the Looney Hour. Ben's got some awesome information that he's going to share with us. Now, he consults for a lot of institutional level investors across Canada. So people reach out to him for his knowledge in the housing market, specifically trends that you might not see from large scale information providers like Bloomberg or whoever it may be. So we're going to be talking about interest rate environments in Canada. We're going to be talking about the supply of single family homes, condos, purpose-built rentals, where the opportunities are in the real estate market right now, both by asset class and locationally. So if you're looking across Canada, where is the opportunity? You'll find that interesting. And also, if you're interested in subscribing to Ben's service, he does give our listeners a discount code that will be at the end of the show. If you don't catch it, just reach out to me and I will send it to you guys. That's it for now. Let's get to the show. My name is Cody Kraus, and I'm a real estate broker owner that's obsessed with everything real estate. Investing, building, selling, developing, farming, you name it. I've been doing this since I was 18 years old, and I've learned a ton through trial and error, and I've met some of the coolest people ever. This is a show where I invite these people on to talk about their experiences and mine, plus everything else real estate. Let's go. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the Everything Real Estate Show. Today, I got a really cool guest on the podcast with me. Ben Rabidoux is joining us. And for anybody that doesn't know who Ben is, he runs Edge Analytics. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit today, talk about what exactly Edge does for the real estate industry. Without further ado, why don't we just start with who is Ben?
Hey, Cody. Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Who am I? Well, I run a couple of real estate focused research services. One is geared more towards institutional investors. So I work with a lot of mutual fund companies, pension funds, hedge fund types. And for them, I cover Canadian housing, macroeconomics, household credit trends. From that, one of the things I discovered is that real estate professionals have just a tremendous wealth of knowledge that is kind of untapped by institutional investors. And so, for example, I would speak with realtors, mortgage brokers, and I would just say, like, hey, like, how's your business? Like, what are you guys seeing out there?
Yep.
And they would tell me things that would show up, 6 weeks down the road in the data. They'd say, oh, actually, we're starting to see more people come through open houses and getting a lot more inquiries. Sure enough, you wait 6 weeks, you see the uptick in the official data. So from that, I would used to say that to my institutional clients, and they'd say, well, there's got to be some way to tap that knowledge and turn it into like an index of forward real estate activity, right?
Yep.
And so that was actually where Edge Analytics came from. The thinking behind Edge Analytics is somewhat selfishly. I thought, well, I can take the institutional quality research that we're doing, make it accessible to real estate professionals, but hopefully if we can build the distribution wide enough, then that would give me the opportunity to tap your knowledge and be able to kind of, you know, aggregate surveys and see kind of what folks on the front lines are seeing and turn that into some sort of an index of real estate activity. So that's what it is in terms of what we actually do. We do a couple of real estate reports each month. We do quarterly outlook calls. We do marketing infographics that are used pretty widely by real estate professionals. So we try to make it just try to keep our subscribers kind of positioned as the experts in their local fields and give them kind of touch points to engage with their client base.
Okay, cool. So I would imagine your background probably like formally education wise, things like that is economics. Fair to say, like you're always tracking what's going on with overnight lending rates. You're paying attention to a lot of the key metrics. I mean, if institutional investors are tapping on your shoulder for your data, I would imagine that you kind of have a background in that. Fair to say?
Less than you would think. My background actually
Okay.
is in human and physical geography. And so I actually, it's tangentially related to economics. It's a lot of demographics. It is some economics, but less directly. It came about somewhat organically in that I had a public facing website years ago. We're talking over a decade ago now. And like a blog, basically. And
Yeah.
from that, built out a distribution list somewhat like that organically of these institutional investors, and then realized, there's a market for this. I don't need to be putting my thoughts up for free, and turned it into a research newsletter. And then it kind of went from there.
So you're almost compiling what's happening already in the real estate market and then selling it to people that want access to, I guess, a focused understanding of it or a focused explanation of it.
Well, that's exactly right. So if you think about the structure of the Canadian stock market, right? You, off the top of my head, I think financials are something around 30% of the market cap, give or take. I'd have to look, but they
Wow.
account for even more of that when it comes to their earnings. So you have to have a view on what's happening at the banks. If you're a big mutual fund manager and your mandate is Canadian equities, you have to care about what's happening in the housing and consumer credit landscape because
Yep.
it's so impactful to the Canadian financials, which is such a huge part of your benchmark.
And you're talking like
So,
six banks too. It's not like a couple hundred or a thousand,
no,
right?
that's right. Six massive banks. You
Yep.
have to own them if you're a Canadian mutual fund manager. So, you sort of just want to have somebody who's out there sniffing around, trying to understand what's happening in that, the economy, the household kind of credit landscape. And that's where I fit in.
Okay, cool. Now, I heard of you because you're a regular guest on a number of podcasts, specifically the Looney Hour, I think is my favorite appearance that you make somewhat regularly under the Seinfeld reference.
Yep.
I'm pulling a blank
Bob
on what,
Sacamano.
yeah,
Well,
Bob
that's a
Sacamano.
funny reference. So actually, we didn't come up with that. So what happened was, because I talk to those guys so regularly, they're constantly referencing my research, right? And
Yep,
so one of their listeners messaged me on Twitter and he said, you're like the Bob Sacamano. They're constantly talking about you, but like, you're hardly ever on.
you're
It's
not
like
actually
this,
on the show.
you're not on the show. So they said you're the
Yep.
Bob Sacamano of the Looney Hour. So I messaged those guys and we thought it was hilarious. And it just kind of took off from there.
That's awesome. Cool. And so a lot of what they lean into you then is they want to hear what you're seeing is likely going to happen when it comes to interest rates or the credit landscape. So what's going to happen as far as mortgages. I appreciate a lot of the data that you're tracking, which is like the money supply and so it's a lot of data that's very, very applicable to the real estate industry, but not really widely published. How come more people don't talk about that stuff or make it widely known what is happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's kind of the niche that I peddle in is the housing related statistics that aren't widely followed, but that are impactful when you understand them. Right.
Okay.
That's so my value add, I always say to my institutional clients is if you can pull up this data set on your Bloomberg terminal, it's just probably not the sort of thing I'm going to track in. I track in the stuff that's kind of, it's not well followed, but very impactful. And so, to your point, things like money supply growth, insolvency data, even things as simple as inventory levels.
Yeah.
Like you'd be surprised how hard it is to get inventory levels across major boards. So like I try, and that's how do you have a view on the housing market if you don't know how much supply is out there, right? So
Yeah.
that's simple things like that is where I fit in.
Now, I've only been following you for probably just over a year now, and a recent subscriber to your analytics service. Which, if anybody wants active information about what's happening right now in the Canadian real estate market, highly recommend Edge Analytics. I'll plug that for sure. I use a lot of their infographics, which is Ben's infographics, and I find it really helpful. And I'm not a highly educated person or anything like that, but he filters through it in a way and makes it fairly understandable to me, and I can take that and use it to explain to our clients and our realtors at our office. So I appreciate that, but I'm curious, as you were tracking money supply, as you were tracking interest rates, all that kind of stuff through COVID, could you kind of put the picture together of what exactly was happening when things turned in March 22 and rates all of a sudden started getting increased?
Yeah, that was a wild time. So, it's funny. Okay, so if you remember in the early days of COVID, there was this crazy thing where, obviously economy shuts down, unemployment basically surges to, I mean, off the top of my head, I think it hit almost 30%, like just an unfathomable number. And what the government did, of course, was send out all these stimulus checks, which were without question needed at the time, With the benefit of hindsight, we can look back and say, well, maybe they weren't as targeted as they should have been. Maybe there was too much money. But it's one of those things where it's like when the crap's about to hit the fan, you have to do something, even if it's the wrong thing. And they were
Yep.
kind of in that situation. So all this money got sent out into the economy. No one had anywhere to spend it, right? So savings rate shot up. All this money just sat there waiting to get spent once the economy reopened. And then importantly, the government came out and basically put in these measures that said, well, if you can't make your mortgage payment, just don't worry about it. We'll basically force the banks to give everyone a mortgage holiday, this mortgage deferral. And at one point, I'm going to botch the exact number, but it was something like 40% of all mortgages in Canada at one point had been deferred, seen deferred payments. So just this enormous number. Um, what was interesting is a lot of people started to say, well, there's a mortgage deferral cliff coming, that once they end this deferral program, you're going to see a huge issue with the housing market because
And
all
it
of a
was an
sudden,
extended amortization, right? Like they didn't get a holiday from their payments and never have to make them. It just extended the period based on the number of months that they deferred.
right, but there was a period where you didn't have to make any payments at all, right? So you're right. In effect, they tacked it on the end.
Yep.
But the thinking was, because there was still so much weakness in the economy, once that sort of grace period ended, you would see mortgage delinquency spike, right? And
Yep.
it kind of made sense. But then people went beyond that and they said, well, once that happens, you're going to see the housing market really start to fall apart. Now, I often get labeled as a housing bear. And one of the things that you find is when you're in that kind of real estate media space, um, people want to talk to you when there's bad things happening. It's just
Okay.
natural. You get a call from people. If it bleeds, it leads in the media. So I'll get calls. I'll make comments when I'm concerned. And I'm sorry, let me mute this. Oh, it is on mute. It's my wife texting me.
All good.
So at any rate, you know, one of the things I found is that in that kind of mortgage deferral period, like I just did the math and I said, okay, well, let's assume that all of these mortgages that are currently in deferral, let's say that all of them get come on the market at once when this deferral ends. What is that going to do to the market balance? Because there was so few homes for sale on the market in 2020 and 2021 that if you added all those mortgages that had been deferred to the inventory levels, you still would have had like almost no inventory. You would have had like 2.5 months of inventory nationally.
And
So I
that's
made the
because of
point.
the like the pop sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that like population growth is one of the main things that you're tracking in your analytics I guess data. And so was that relative to population growth there? Is that the reason that there was such a strain on inventory levels or
There was a lot of things that you had enormous demand coming out of COVID, right? It was the craziest time. Everyone was buying, no one was selling. And so you had this incredible compression in inventory levels. And it wasn't just during COVID, it had actually been for a couple of years prior to that. You saw this progressive decline in inventory. And so all that to say, like I said, look, this mortgage deferral cliff is non-issue. It's not going to matter. And in fact, in 2021, I said, come the end of this year, we're going to see record high house prices nationally. We will see a record house price appreciation just based on how tight that market was. So that was some of the weird distorting effects coming out of COVID, as you saw all this money suddenly come into the economy as the economy started to reopen. There wasn't a lot of housing available for sale, record low rates. You had mortgage rates in that kind of 1% range. It was like a perfect cocktail, right? House prices exploded higher. Where you guys are down in Windsor, you guys at one point were seeing prices up like 40% year over year, like just
yeah.
crazy, crazy appreciation. And coming out of that, then you started to sense that all of that money that had flowed into the economy, because there was still some issues around supply, right? Supply chains were still kind of snarled. You had a lot of demand for goods and services, not a lot of supply. You started to see the inflation rate really perk up. And for a while there, the central banks, like the Bank of Canada, were like, oh, we think it's transitory. We don't think it's really going to last. And every month it just kept going higher and higher. Eventually it was like 7, 8%.
Yeah.
And that was when you got into 2022 and everyone went, oh, geez, maybe this is a real issue. Then that's when we got into this big, crazy rate hiking cycle come 2022. And that's where the market kind of hit a wall, and we're still dealing with the fallout of that kind of post 2022 rate hike environment. And that's kind of where we find ourselves today. And I'm happy to walk through what I think a prognosis is for the real estate market and rates, or maybe you want to jump in and fix it. I can just talk forever if you
No,
want.
I think that's great. Maybe for the listenership, like obviously, most of my listeners would be Windsor, Essex, so we don't have a huge condo supply
Mhm.
issue like many other parts or larger cities in Canada would per se. We did have a boom of people that were coming down from the GTA and just putting contracts on unbuilt semis and townhomes
Yep,
and even
I do
single
remember
family
that.
homes here because they're about the same price comparably as a two-bedroom condo in a lot of larger city markets.
Yep,
And obviously what developers were seeing there is people were putting contracts down with, $100,000, $140,000 deposits, but they were putting deposits on three homes with the intentions on closing on zero of them.
right.
And when those contracts became worthless because the price had dropped from, I know the condos in the GTA were being sold somewhere around like 1,600 bucks a square foot on a lot of the pre-sales, and right now they're probably selling for 1,100-ish, give or take. Here, we were seeing single family homes not necessarily sell on a per square foot basis. At the time, a home in a subdivision might have been going for $1 million, and that might have been a 2,000 square foot home. Where now you're seeing some of those around 899 or
Mm,
799 if they're really trying to move it. And so a lot of people are just willing to forfeit the deposit back to the developer, and the developer's sitting there with this home that they got to sell now. So we're not as big of a crisis here because it's a lot easier to unload a few single family homes
yep,
at
of
eight,
course.
900,000, where in, cities like Toronto, Mississauga, Guelph, Kitchener, like I would imagine you're seeing a very large supply there of way oversold condos. Now banks are putting blanket appraisals on them, which is a funny made up term for we'll appraise them for more than they're actually worth,
Yep.
just to the sake of getting them over the finish line to close. Yeah, maybe talk to us about what you see happening there, future of interest rates in Canada over the course of 25 and leading into 26.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot there that we could talk about. There were some really kind of pernicious dynamics at play leading up to the peak, right? So to your point, there's sort of a unique kind of craziness that gripped the condo market specifically in Toronto to the point where people who were buying in pre-construction were paying 30% above resale market, like comparable resale, like new build resale for a unit. So in other words, to use your numbers, like let's say resale was 1,100 a square foot. They were paying 15, 1,600 a square foot for a comparable unit that would be delivered 4 or 5 years down the road. Now, the problem
Yeah.
is that was kind of that 2020, 2021 period. You roll that forward 4 or 5 years, that's kind of today. So a lot of those condos are now starting to complete and now they're significantly underwater and it's creating a lot of issues around closing. Now that's sort of an idiosyncratic issue that's concentrated in Toronto.
Yeah.
There was an issue related to that in the single family space, but like you said, it's much smaller. It's a much smaller market. It clears quicker because you're not dealing with like a 5 year lag. You're dealing with a year to build single family or less. So a lot of those issues have already somewhat been resolved. But it was a painful adjustment for sure for the market.
Big time.
Now, what's going to help ultimately is, I mean, there's a number of things. And I do think, like, I actually have a view that 2025 was shaping up to be a decent year for home sales nationally, like a considerable improvement over 2024, up until the point where Trump said 51st state,
Yeah. Now,
right?
was
And
that
once
on
the,
units or price or both?
well, primarily units. I actually
Yeah.
think prices are going to grind or maybe move marginally higher because I actually think new listings will stay fairly high this year. But I was expecting sales to be up 15 to 20% over 2024 levels, pretty much
Which
across the
were
board.
down, right?
Oh yeah, it
Just for
wasn't. Yeah, it was a
context.
low
Yeah.
bar. Yeah, I'm not saying it was going to be an amazing year, but it was going to be a considerable improvement over 2024 levels.
Yeah.
That obviously has been somewhat sidelined by some of this tariff talk and all the other trade uncertainty. But I actually still think that the back half of this year is going to be pretty good. And the reason for that is, first off, I have a view, pretty strong view around interest rates that they still have to go considerably lower. I think at a minimum, we're going to see the Bank of Canada cut to the 2% range by the summer. So, a general rule of thumb is if you take the Bank of Canada's rate and you add a percentage point, maybe 1.2 percentage points to it, you get kind of roughly what a decent mortgage rate is. So if you take the Bank Canada rate at 2%, that means we would be looking at mortgages by the summer in the kind of low 3% range and potentially in the high 2% range for an insured deal. Insured
And for
tend to be priced
context, we're
lower.
recording this beginning of April. Overnight rate right now is 2.75.
Mhm.
Schedule A banks are for A class borrowers with great credit, all that kind of stuff. They're quoting typically 3.99 is the
Yep.
advertised rate right now for a 5-year fixed. So you think that could be, 3.2 territory potentially by the summer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that could even, like I said, on insured deals where they tend to get a little bit lower rates, you could see it in the high twos. So that's going to move the needle a lot on affordability. Now, the issue is going to be whether the consumer confidence will be back to take
Yep.
advantage of that and whether the economy is going to hold together. And I actually think it will. I have a somewhat contrarian view that I think a lot of these tariff issues are going to be largely resolved by then. I'm very optimistic on that. Look, ultimately, once you start making predictions around what Donald Trump's going to do, like you're just into the realm of like who the hell knows, right? So,
Yep.
I have no unique insight into what that guy's thinking, but it seems to me that one of the ways you become really unpopular as a president is you lead your economy into a recession, you cause prices to go up. And he's doing both of those things. So at some point, someone's got to pull him aside and be like, listen, if we want any hope of winning any midterms and keeping control, we got to start scaling this back. The other
Yeah.
thing I think people need to remember is so much of real estate is a confidence game, right? Because you're dealing with the biggest purchase of people's lives. You have to have inherently an optimistic outlook on your employment situation, the state of the economy to make that purchase. If you look at what's happening right now with consumer confidence, it is as low as we have ever seen. Like literally lower today than it was at the depths of COVID, during the financial crisis when we thought the financial system was going to melt down. Lower today than any of those periods, which is
What are
which is
the
crazy.
metrics to track that? Just curiosity, like objectively, how do we gauge confidence in the, say, the housing market broadly?
Well, the housing market is one particular component of the index. So the index construction is, and this is Conference Board of Canada data. What they do is they ask people these recurring questions every month. They would call a whole bunch of people and they would say, I mean, it's a whole series of questions, but are you optimistic on your job prospects? Do you have more disposable income this month than last month? Is a good time to make a major purchase? They ask a bunch of these kind of standardized questions. They weight them, and it feeds into this index. So that's the construct, and it's the same questions over and over and over again.
Okay.
So my point is, it feels to me like we have a level of pessimism that is irrational right now in Canada. Like if I told you today, look, you got three scenarios. One is 2008, 2009, where we legitimately worried that the financial system would not be there and we'd be going back to like bartering. Remember, like it was a crazy scary time. That's option one.
Yep.
Option two, you have this novel virus floating around. We know nothing about it. The whole world is locked down. We're afraid that maybe it's going to kill half of us. Like we have no idea what this thing is. Okay, that's the second option. Or the third option, we're worried about some tariffs that may or may not be there in a month. Which of those three seems like the least scary? And it's
Yeah, I'll
clearly
take
it's
number three. Yeah.
right. So this is the situation we find ourselves in. And you got to remember, people just want stability. If tomorrow Donald Trump comes out and says, okay, here's the deal, it's 10% tariffs across the board, 20% on autos, deal with it. Then everyone in Canada goes, okay, all right, that's what we're dealing with. Now we know, let's adjust, let's figure things out. How do we deal with this? And we go forward. And confidence will come roaring back just from that stability alone. And I think we're going to get that as we move through this spring. So I'm still optimistic the second half of this year because of the improved affordability that we're going to get because of some resolution to this tariff issue. I do think you're going to see sales perk up.
Yeah. Now you said that people's greatest, I guess, desire or want is security, and not just because I happen to sell real estate for a living, but I do believe that owning a home in the place that you live in does give people a great sense of security. So regardless of what's happening, whether it's a virus that's floating around like in 2020 or whatever, home was still generally a safe space. And Unfortunately, there's a lot of speculative investors that have gotten into real estate over the last 5 years because it looked really good, because it was a good, 15-year bull market. Now you have a lot of investors getting out, and that's actually affecting tenants that are in the homes. And just like the holiday for mortgage payments was announced, Doug Ford in Ontario also said, you know what, no new rent evictions either. And a lot of people understood that as
Yep.
actually I don't have to pay rent for a little while, which wasn't the case. And so there's still a lot of, I think, investors that thought real estate investing looked great. Some of them were speculation purely, where we're expecting the prices to go up. Others where anybody can be a landlord and this is easy. And I think even on the condo side, if they paid a reasonable price for it, and they had a 2.5% mortgage rate and it renewed into, 5.5 or 6.5. And also, by the way, inflation didn't just affect homeowners, it affected condo owners like crazy because we've seen condo association fees go up. For example, I have a condo and our condo fees went from in 2019 they were $248 I think to now 501,
Hmm.
which is 100% increase and more. So that's affecting the cash flow side of it too. But if I own where I live, I can prepare my financial situation to at least do whatever I can to make the mortgage payments. Now, if my landlord can't afford to keep where I live, well, that doesn't really give me a whole sense of security if he's refinancing it every time I turn around and bring prospective buyers through it and all that kind of stuff too. So I think even if confidence isn't great, there's still life events where people go, it'd be better for me to own where I live than rent it.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I've been a renter, been an owner. I was quite happy with both. But one of the things that does concern me is just the fact that we're seeing, we saw a lot of new landlords get into
Yeah.
the real estate investments business. And I do worry that you'll see a lot of churn there, right? Whether some of that people will realize it's not the easy money they were promised. Dealing with tenants in Ontario sometimes just is kind of sucks, right? The laws are not in your favor as a
No.
landlord. I do wonder if some of that you'll see some of that supply come back on the market over the next couple of years. But I can't argue with that. Having been both a renter and an owner, I prefer being an owner. But look, that's just the reality is our house prices are still incredibly unaffordable. And I was fortunate enough to buy in before this dramatic run up. And you feel for the people that are kind of priced out for the time being, and you do hope that there's an improvement in that front, and we get some semblance of reasonable affordability. And we're still a long ways from that. It's getting better, but we're a long ways from what you might call like a reasonable long-term affordable dynamic in Canada.
Yeah, I think affordable used to be we could do it on one decent income. I feel like now it's two and a half. If we have
Yeah,
equity
those
from
days
a
are long gone, man. Yeah.
if we had equity from, a prior home ownership that went up in value or whatever it is, great, or an inheritance maybe, but to actually get into the market at today's prices and stay there, because it's one thing to finance the home, it's another to continue to own it. Typically, you got to have two or even more incomes, and that's why we're seeing a lot of multi-generational housing come into effect, where mother-in-law's in the suite over the garage or in the basement, or adult kids haven't left home yet, all that kind of stuff. And I mean, at the same time, we're seeing political parties do whatever they can to keep housing prices up too. As much as they might say they want housing to be affordable and they want to fix the housing crisis, they also don't want prices to plummet. It would affect their banking system. It would affect their votership that considers, their home an asset and a mix of their retirement plan and all that kind of stuff too, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it was, I mean, Trudeau himself said they're not going to do anything to directly impact the value of people's largest asset. It's the one of the ways you get yourself voted out of office.
Yeah.
It is interesting though. Like I am starting to sense that there's a more of an acceptance from the older generations that things have gone too far. We need some sort of a solution that moves the needle for affordability for young people. Because at the end of the day, everyone thinks like I think prior to the last couple of years, what you said is 100% true that everyone viewed their house as their largest asset. Don't do anything to impact the value. But I think you're starting to hear more and more that the older generation's like, you know what? I really want my kids to be able to live near, relatively close to me. I want to be able to see my grandkids. I don't want to have to live in some far-flung
Yeah.
area because they can't afford to be near me here. And that's the first time, I mean, that I've ever started to hear that sort of a change in attitude, that there's sort of a sense that no, we need a broader sense, the greater good, and somehow get prices to a more reasonable level for the next generation. So I'm optimistic. You may still see that there's some political parties that want to try to orchestrate some affordability strategies that are more geared towards increasing the level of supply, right? They're all trying to figure out how do we get more supply to the market to bring prices to a more affordable level. But at the end of the day, I think there just needs to be an acceptance that we need an extended stretch where house prices just don't do what they did over the last 10, 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Where they're
If they're
flat
going to
or
go
whatever.
up
Yeah, or
single
they go up
digit, not
slightly
double.
less than inflation, right? So if inflation's running 2, 3, 4%, maybe you get 1, 2% growth in your house price. And you can, if you have incomes growing pretty robustly, and right now it's one of the things we have in Canada is very strong wage growth. If you have incomes going up a fair bit, prices are going up moderately. Like you can do a lot of heavy lifting on affordability without prices crashing, right?
Yeah. And I said to people the whole time during like 22, 23, 24, and now into 25, like the government did what they could do. They flexed their muscle. They can't do anything immediately about supply, but they can turn down the demand dial really quick by
Yes.
cranking up interest rates, right? But it doesn't fix the underlying issue, which was we don't have enough supply to meet our current population. And I think that you know what, they're not dumb and they're aware of that now. And you even have, Trudeau, obviously he stepped down, but before he stepped down, he said, you know what, we had too much immigration for what we were able to house.
Yep.
And immigration's a great thing. Nobody would be here in Canada really without it. But you got to do it responsibly. You got to have places for these people to live. You can't make things unaffordable for the people that do call it home or even that want to call it home. I think in your last report, I noticed that I guess, population growth has slowed compared to the prior 3, 4, maybe in 5 years. Do you know what the federal, or I guess what trends are you seeing? Is it going to be a lot less continued into the future? Is it less this year? Is it going to go back to pre-COVID levels? And how's that going to affect, I guess, our housing market?
Well, this is one of the mm, big things that I think people are underappreciating in Canada is just how much the immigration and population growth landscape has switched,
Yeah.
and and also how much public support there is around this idea that maybe we need more thoughtful policies related to immigration. So for your listeners, one of the things that's really important to understand is we used to have a run rate of kind of 250,000 to maybe 400,000 population growth on an annual basis for most of the last 10 years. That was
Yeah.
kind of roughly the range. In any year, you were expanding the population 250,000.
Which is
Um,
1%, right?
yeah,
If you're a
give
country
or
of
take
35
one.
million.
Yeah, that's right. One to maybe one and a bit. But on most years we were building somewhere around 175 to 200,000 new homes. So it was quite manageable in that context.
Yep.
Um, then what happened is you started to see the permanent resident target increase. So Canada has a certain amount of permanent resident admission allocation every year. It was raised progressively from kind of 250 up to 500,000. That's not really an issue. I think most Canadians accept that and think that that's a good thing. You want to bring in the best and the brightest. We want highly trained, highly qualified people come to the country. No one had a real issue with that.
Yep.
But that caused the population growth to perk up. But then, secondarily to that, and what was, I think, the major policy failure, is we had a dramatic loosening around temporary residents. So, in particular, work permit holders and international students. So, you
Yep.
remember coming out of the lockdowns during COVID, you had a real tightness in the labor market. Everyone was trying to hire, you couldn't get anyone to work. So, the government said, no problem. If you want to bring people in from abroad, we'll let you do it on a temporary basis. And for a period of time there, we had population growth in Canada that hit 1.3 million in a single year. And of that 1.3, 800,000 were temporary residents.
So
So that, and
500% of a typical year four to five
An
hundred percent.
enormous number. Yeah, just an enormous number. So, and if you think about it in this sense, like temporary residents are almost all renters, right?
Yeah.
If you come here as an international student, you can't buy, or you're prohibited from buying now. And so you rent. 800,000 renters, you drop them into the Canadian population in a year. I mean, it does crazy things for the rental market. So we have this insane rental market from kind of 2021, 2022 into 2023. The government finally recognized that this has gotten away from them and has implemented some pretty dramatic policy changes to address that. And if you look at what they specifically are targeting, they are estimating that that cohort of temporary residents, which is now over 3 million in Canada, so it's doubled in the last couple of years, they want to reduce that by about 400,000 annually for the next 2 years. And they're going to do that through a number of policy measures. But bottom line is, if you believe that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, we are going to see population growth basically drop to zero for 2 years because
Yep.
of the outflows of temporary residents. Now, when I say that, people think, well, that has to be bad for real estate. But I disagree. I think it's very bad for the rental market. You will see a softening or a normalization of the rental market, which is a good thing because we had a couple of years there where nationally the vacancy rate was like 1%. And in most
Yep.
of Ontario, it was virtually zero. So if it goes from 1% to back to the normal range of like, 3.5%, that's a good thing. That's a normal, healthy market, and that's where we need to get to. So that's, I think, what we're going to see over the next couple of years. But you're going to see a reduction of temporary residents, but permanent resident growth is going to be still quite strong. They're still looking at 400,000 a year. So that's and those are home buyers. So you're going to see a reduction in rental demand, but a continued increase in home buyer demand. And so that's why one of the things I said coming into 2025 is you will see a divergence between the resale market, which I still think is going to perk up this year, and the rental market, which I think is going to be quite soft throughout this year.
And to separate the asset classes too. Um, excuse me, I think you're going to see a lot of people like gravitate towards a home with a yard, not the condo, right? Because a lot of what the condos were being built for was to house the temporary student or the temporary foreign worker, or whatever it is. Sorry, whoever they were is probably the correct way to say it. But at the end of the day, Canadian dream is get a job, start a family, and it's tough to do that in an apartment where if you have a house with grass, obviously it can accommodate the family dream much better. But also it's more of a tangible item where it's something that can be redeveloped, where you actually have true ownership over it, not condominium or in BC strata ownership or whatever they call it. But it's a real tangible asset that we can make changes to. Our life is less inhibited by our neighbors because it's not over top of someone else or underneath or beside someone else attached necessarily. It could be if it's a semi or townhome. But at the end of the day, if we're only building on average 175,000 units of these a year and we have 400,000 residents, is I think the number that you said there, 400,000,
Mhm.
even though we're reducing the temporary visas, we're still bringing in 400,000 permanent residents who are able to buy, which right now with the foreign home buyer ban, if you're not a resident, there's a few hoops you can jump through if you're
It's a
working on
pain.
your
Yeah.
residency and things like that, or if you're outside of a census metro area. But on average, if you're temporary, you can't buy. The permanent residents can. So we got 400,000 still coming a year, even with the reduction of the temporary, and we're still only building 175,000. Like there's an imbalance there. And I know we have a birth rate. It's almost negligible. I believe it's a negative birth rate right now. And I can see that probably continuing as a country for a while, maybe approaching balance, but not necessarily growing organically our own population. But to your point, there's still a lag in supply.
Yeah,
And
well, let me jump in there because I think you're touching on something that is important and that I've kind of flagged as another one of the big themes for 2025 and beyond,
sure.
which is a divergence between condos and single family.
Okay.
So you're absolutely right. And in fact, the numbers are considerably worse than what you just laid out. If you look at single family housing starts over the last 12 months, they're only running at 60,000. That's
This
it,
is across the
60,000
country.
across the country.
Wow.
And what's taken their place, and that's, by the way, that's dramatically lower than the long-term average. What's taken their place is a huge run-up in rental construction. We've seen 90,000 rental units started in the last year. And of course, condos, which continue to run around 60,000. So single family housing starts are plunging. And if you look even at the forward indicators for construction activity, so before you can start building a single family home, you have to get a permit to build. And the permits look even worse. Permit
Well,
activity in Ontario is running at 40-year lows. So that tells you that there's actually going to be not a lot of new single family supply later this year through 2026 and beyond. And so at the same time, you still have a lot of condo activity. A lot of it is still being built. A lot's going to be delivered. The resale market is already extremely saturated with condos. So I think you're going to see the pricing trends continue to widen. Like you're going to see single family start to perk up. I believe later this year, pricing will probably get a little better. Condos, I think, are probably going to keep grinding lower for a little while. So I agree with your sentiment that you can paint the picture that the single family market will be undersupplied. That's probably not a story for maybe this year, but more a story for as the market recovers in 26 and beyond.
yeah, and you shared a really good graph in your reports that kind of showed that. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to misquote it, but it showed condos peaking, units being introduced to the market or permitted 2022. It was 21 or 22. PBRs, purpose-built rentals, they're still on the rise. And the reason for
Yep.
that right now is because the financing programs through CMHC, which is, 50-year amortization schedules, low rates, everything like that. So you can kind of put a picture together here. There was a strong demand for condos, and you needed to have a certain number of them pre-sold in order to start the construction. So,
Hmm.
in 2016 all the way to 2021, you saw a lot of people pre-buying condos. So the starts were up like crazy. Those started trailing down as construction costs are really high, and the demand for condos became less over COVID. So what did developers do? Well, they spun to purpose-built rentals because that's what the government was financing. That was the flavor of the month at the time. And rents were still high, even though it was getting harder to finance condos as the interest rates started going up. Rents stayed high. But all of a sudden now, if the case is that rents are going to start coming down, I would imagine the government's not going to give out as many guaranteed loans on purpose-built rentals. And so we've already seen the supply of condos dipping down. I would imagine purpose-built rentals are just about to peak if they haven't already, maybe start coming down. And then you're going to be looking at, single-family homes at the bottom of this graph that's been almost flat for since the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. They've been hovering between 40 and 60,000 a year, which to me is crazy. We're a country of 40 million people now, I think 41 million people, and we're only introducing, 40,000 single-family home units to the market on an annual basis. But our immigration of permanent residents is 1%. Like we're not growing our number of homes anywhere near 1% of the population, but we're growing the population just on immigration that much. So I totally get your case for why you think single family homes would really hold their value. And sure, they're not going to skyrocket because financing them is tough right now.
Hmm.
But they're going to hold and probably rise slightly, not because there's not economic challenges, just because the supply hasn't met the demand for the last 10 years, really.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's always there's this saying that's like the most money is made and lost when people forget that cyclical things are cyclical,
Yeah.
right? And there's nothing more cyclical than housing. And so, at peak in 2021 and 2022, when people were doing all sorts of stupid things, people thought this thing would never cycle. It was going to go up forever. There was, a massive shortage of homes. And so therefore I can justify paying whatever price for this. And people forgot the cycle. And now, you're seeing some of those people that jumped in are losing a lot of money. But similarly, I think people who extrapolate the current environment into the indefinite future are going to miss out on the inflection, which is coming. This market is going to improve, and eventually there will be an upcycle in this market. And when demand starts to improve, my concern is it's going to improve into an environment of much diminished supply as we're seeing currently. And so, yeah, that market looks, I mean, things look pretty good for kind of 2026 and beyond, I think, especially single family. I think you could see a pretty strong market if if the economy holds together and we don't get these crazy tariffs and trade wars and everything, if we get a resolution to that, I think things will be considerably better a year from now.
Yeah, and every economist I've listened to over the last 6, 8, 12 months, they all agree that tariffs are not good long term for anyone's economy, both the people putting them on or the people being affected by them. Long term, it's not a good solution to anything. And is he getting some things that he wants out of it? Sure. I mean, we're seeing a lot of companies, sign big deals to produce manufacturing in the States, like Apple's bringing some big stuff, Hyundai's bringing some big stuff. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be a good long-term implementation. And so when they go, I do think that there's still going to be that demand for housing. Um, I'm not sure where I was going with that.
Yeah, no,
I
let me jump
apologize,
in because
but
I think that's right. I think the one thing where I would maybe take a slightly different view on is I don't I don't think the tariffs are necessarily universally bad. We all agree that having as free a trade as possible is generally good, right? If a country is excellent and very efficient at producing this one thing and they do it at the best cost, let them do that and we'll do this.
yeah,
Where I think it gets tricky is when you start dealing with countries whose competitive advantage is we just don't give a shit about the environment and that's our competitive advantage. Well, like that's not free trade. So like if you're a manufacturer trying to compete with China and their environmental standards is, well, we just dump everything in the ocean,
or exploit
right?
child labor.
Right,
Yeah,
or we we use child or slave labor in some cases. Like, well, that's not free trade. So I am all in favor of tariffing that to get that back to level playing field if that's what you're trying to compete against. But as a tool, and the other thing I would say is like I have a different view. In retrospect, it was clear that the whole fentanyl thing from the U.S. administration ended up being not really what this was all about. And fine, I happen to think that we do have an issue with fentanyl in this country, which is a lengthier discussion. But if you're dealing with legitimate matters of border security, you could argue that they can be policy that can move the needle on that front, but as a permanent solution to raise revenue, which seems to be what the Trump administration is trying to do, is just a ridiculous idea.
um, I don't have too many more questions for you, but one, I'm just stringing together your graph in my head right now, and so the number of permits for condos fell off a cliff in 2022, but there was still a lot that were permitted in 2019, 2020, 21, 22 that are going to be coming to completion probably all the way through to 27, 28, 29. If there's no new permits happening, say between 23 and 29, what does that do for the future of the condominium market in Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is where you get into, I think, the distinction between the short-term view and the long-term view. Over the short term. So let's define the short term as the next 1 to 3 years.
Okay.
The condo market's going to struggle. There's a lot of supply. There's obviously not a lot of demand. The investors are gone, understandably. The rental market looks soft. Rents are down considerably in the condo market in the big cities.
Condo fees are up.
Condo fees are up. So it's not a great environment.
Yep.
Um, so that's the next, who knows, 1 year, 2 year, whatever it might be. But if you look at the trend in new condo sales in a place like Toronto, there's only been about 4,000 new, i.e., pre-construction condos sold in the last 12 months. So before a developer can begin constructing a condo, they need to pre-sell typically 70 or 80% of them before they get bank financing to build. So in other words, new condo sales, pre-construction sales, are a leading indicator of where condo starts will be typically 18 to 24 months down the road. So we know with certainty that condo starts this year in Toronto are going to fall off a cliff
Yep.
and they will be abysmally low, probably right through 2026. So when you roll that forward, you go 3, 4 years, 5 years from then, when all of those units should have been completing, all of a sudden we'll see completions come kind of 28, 29 that are incredibly low. Like you're talking again, like 4, 5, 6,000 new units. Now remember, in Toronto, in the last 12 months, I just ran these numbers today for a report I just wrote. We have had 18,000 condos sell in the resale market in a really weak market. This is not a good condo market. We still sold 18,000 resale condos.
Well,
That's the demand. So 18,000 resale condos, you roll this forward, and in a few years, you're only going to have 5,000, 4,000 completions. There will be a shortage of condos, and it will set up for an interesting investment opportunity then. But the difference is between now and then, prices, I think, are very likely to get lower. So trying to time the exact entry into the condo market is tricky and is beyond, my skill set for figuring out. But you can see that in the short term, there's a lot of headwinds. Beyond the next 2, 3, 4 years, things look quite optimistic for the condo market.
So one thing you said was people tend to make a lot of money when everyone else seems to forget that everything's cyclical.
Yeah, or they
Um,
lose a lot of money when they forget it. They do one or the other.
yeah, and so I think that's similar to Buffett's advice, which is get greedy when everyone else is scared and be scared when everyone else is greedy. And I know I'm totally guilty. So I started my real estate career in 2011. I started investing in 2015. So I started right at the end of a recovery and then saw a bull market for the whole time. And I was generally pretty well principled from my investing advice and all that kind of stuff. And I started getting that fear of missing out. I started believing that, wow, that things really aren't going to change. Like, how could home prices come down when the demand is so strong, when our supply is so low? Like, they can't just raise interest rates like crazy overnight. And then they did. And
Yeah.
so I abandoned some of my principles that I, started my career on 13, 14 years ago, which are cash flow positive. Don't just buy because everyone else is buying. Like, make sure the deal's paper, they pencil out, they make sense, all that kind of stuff. And I started buying into that. Yeah, how could things get better in the short term here? And my investments worked out really well that were bought on principles. And then when I started getting into that FOMO, that's when all of a sudden they didn't work out the way that the other ones had. And so I could see the headlines from our conversation. If you had AI pump out a couple headlines from this conversation that we've had so far, it's condo market's down like crazy, rents are way down. Like, there's a lot of bad ones, but I always challenge our realtors in our office to go, okay, well, what is the opportunity? Because if you're
Yeah.
standing in line at the coffee shop, and comes up to you and says, "Hey Ben, how's the real estate market right now?" If your answer is things are really down, condos are oversupplied, prices are down, interest rates are up, it's not great. No, there's got to be opportunity in every market. And so I'm putting together this timeline in my head where condos are currently oversupplied and probably will be until 2029, 2030. So if you were going to buy a condo, I would think that your window of opportunity for a pretty decent deal is going to be sometime between 2025 and 2030. So if I'm going to buy a condo, I see an opportunity now in that period. If I was a home builder and I was looking to, set up myself to start building some homes, I would say, okay, I think that the case is going to be there for single family homes to do well over the next 5 years. Again, not skyrocket off the graph paper, but there's going to be a consistent, steady demand for them. So I don't want to go and, you know, necessarily lock up 100 lots and start building 20 specs, but I might want to look at, can I bring a new home to the market fairly close to what the average sale price is for the market that we're in right now? And if so, do I want to maybe lock up 10 or 20 lots and build one or two specs and then slowly get things rolling as we see a few pre-sales happen? So I guess my question to you is, despite the negative headlines, which we've talked about some, is what do you see as an opportunity right now in the market?
Well, I agree with you. There's always opportunities. I would definitely shy away from giving any specific advice. What I would return back to those from a high level, the fundamentals over the longer term do look okay, right? They're not great at the moment, but if you zoom out and you look at the trend in single family home construction, we know we're going to be undersupplied. Even with lower population growth, we're going to be undersupplied in a couple of years. So, I think that's really interesting. I also just think, like, so one of the things that we do every quarter is we do what's called a provincial chart deck, which is just like very little writing, but just a ton of charts that goes across the country. And it looks at all the major kind of fundamentals in all the different provinces. And my thinking is it at least gives you a sense of where to go looking, like what sandbox you want to play in to go
Yep.
looking for deals. And the one thing I've been like, I think we were really good at flagging Calgary as being a massive market outperformer when we first started the service back in 2021. And that's been awesome. We started flagging when the development industry started building maybe in excessive demand and when that market was going to start to soften, and we're seeing that. I flagged Edmonton as being the next best performing metro, and it's been the best performing metro over the last 12 months outside of Quebec City. And right now, I think the most interesting place in the country is actually Saskatchewan. Like the big metros in Saskatchewan look so dramatically undervalued, so underbuilt. So like I know this may not help with the Windsor area specifically. If you
No, it's
were
interesting.
wedded to the Windsor area, I would say single family over the longer term looks interesting. If you have a more national view, I would say that there's parts of Quebec that look fascinating, and Saskatchewan looks really interesting. And I think you'll see the best performing areas over the next 12 months will actually be in those areas. So and you can see that when you go through the provincial chart deck, you see I have a framework for looking for undervalued areas that relates to how tight the resale market is versus how much construction activity there is.
Yep.
Um, and when you apply that framework, you can very easily see, well, this metro's got way too much construction activity relative to demand. This area has nowhere near enough. And so you've got a longer runway of positive price momentum in those areas. And I think that's still the right way to think about it.
So you said you kind of put the idea of this analytics service together based on anecdotal of information, from realtors where they're boots on the ground seeing things happen. And so I didn't tell the future or anything like that. I'm not going to say that I did. But back in 2021, I was talking to a few realtors at a conference that were from Calgary and Edmonton. And I was like, you guys have new condos or like 5 years old for like $300,000. Like that's insane. I was like, rents obviously have to be low if you can buy a new condo or fairly new condo for that price. And they said, well, actually, no. Like we have somewhat of a transient population because of the oil industry. We have a lot of
Mhm.
people coming from out east to work here, so they typically don't buy. They rent. Rents are actually pretty strong. This is what's going on. I'm like, oh, I should buy out west. And then I let that pass. And then all of a sudden, everybody bought out west, and I was like, oh, you know what? Like the information looked good. I didn't act on it. Stupid Cody, whatever, but we've done fine here. I was in Mexico at a brokerage owners event, and I was talking with a gentleman who owns a real estate brokerage in Saskatchewan, and this was just in, I think, the beginning of March. And he goes, "It's nuts out here right now. Like we're getting multiple offers on everything. Prices are going
Mhm.
up. Like it's like COVID 2.0." Now, mind you, for context, his average sale price was much lower than what we're seeing even in Windsor right now.
Yeah.
But there's jobs, there's industry, there's mining, there's I think a lot of companies are no longer saying we have to be headquartered out of Toronto or Ottawa or Vancouver or Calgary.
Yep.
They're saying, look, our employees want to live where they can afford to live.
Yes.
And
Yes. Big
there's
time.
other cities that have great infrastructure where we can do that. We don't like we're in a pretty global economy now, like with good access to the internet. If you're an information or a tech company, you don't have to be out of these other hotspots. And there's people
Yep.
that are very talented that are happy to come and work for you if they can afford to buy a house there.
Yeah, and big time. And let me just add one thing to what you just said. So not only is the resale market really tight, that's the first part of kind of the equation that I look for, but more importantly is if you look at what's under construction and you
Yeah.
strip out rentals, because obviously purpose-built rentals are not going to become future resale supply. Strip out rentals and look at like homeowner dwellings under construction, so single family and condos. They're basically at like 20-year lows in the big metros across Saskatchewan. So what that tells me is the resale market is incredibly tight and developers still have not started to address that, which
Okay.
it's going to take them at least 18 months, 2 years to get to that point. So you've got a long runway at a minimum where price appreciation is going to be quite strong. That's the setup that I look for. It was there in Calgary, 3 years ago, like in spades, 3, 4 years ago, it was a layup. It's there today in Edmonton. It's there today in Saskatchewan, the big metros in Saskatchewan. It's there in parts of Quebec. It's starting to get there in some of the metros in Ontario, but we got a little ways to go. But that to me is the two parts of the equation: tight resale market and developers that have not started to respond to that tightness. That tells you you've got a long runway of positive momentum.
Now, at what point does weather or climate play into that too? Like, I think, okay, Ottawa's a cool city and all, but it's pretty dang cold in the winter. And I would imagine a lot of parts of rural Saskatchewan and Alberta are too. And I went to Calgary, when it wasn't too cold out, and it's a really cool place to visit. I don't know that I would want to go there and spend a lot of time there in the winter as a person who lives in southwestern
See, I
Ontario.
disagree. I
Okay.
disagree. Well, so first of all, so Calgary, so let me frame Calgary because I'm actually
Yep.
really bullish long term. I think they've got a cyclical oversupply issue that's going to, take probably a year to resolve before they resume kind of a bullish trend. Um, Calgary is the sunniest city in the country.
Okay.
It's kind of sunniest. Now, let's be honest. Winters suck everywhere in this country. Like they suck everywhere. So like
Yep.
what I always laugh at is the guys are like, oh, I'm going to retire and go out to Victoria for the winters. I'm like, really? Like you like 2 degrees and rainy? Like that's your idea of a great winter? So like winters suck everywhere. But at least if you're out there and you've got a real winter, you've got snow, you got sun, you've got beautiful outdoors, you got, Banff, the Rockies less than an hour away. I mean, man, like show me a place in this country where the winters don't suck, right? Like
It's
Toronto's
it's
no beautiful, like
no.
it's not a desert island like some beautiful tropical island in Toronto. It's still pretty shitty in the winter. So, you
No,
know,
and fair point. I guess that's why I posed the question is I was curious to from your perspective if location does or climate does play an effect to that. And to your point, like we live in Windsor, Essex, which is the most southern part of Canada. We still get freezing temperature and snow. We had snow yesterday and it's April here. It didn't
yeah,
stick or anything like that. But it's flat as flat can be. And so, you know what, if you're gonna have a winter, at least if you can go snowmobiling or skiing or whatever, or go on top of a mountain and actually get some sun, awesome. You can't do that here. Is it -40 all winter here? No, and our winters are 3 months long instead of maybe five. So
yeah.
I guess, yeah, if you're gonna have winter, have a real winter, not
Edmonton gets real, like it gets that real cold. The nice thing with Calgary is you get the Chinooks, so you still get stretches in the winter where it gets up to 10 degrees,
okay,
right? And sunny. So I think Calgary long term still looks like an awesome city, but I in the near term, and you got to remember everything's relative. So like I don't know, I'm not saying that Saskatchewan is ever going to trade at what a metro in Southern Ontario will, but should it trade where it is, right? Given the positive fundamentals, like to me, it's clearly undervalued, and that's why there's so much demand out there, and that'll get resolved through the pricing mechanism in time.
cool. I got one more thing to say and then I'll let you go. It's getting late here. Um, Anecdotally, 2 weeks ago, open houses were dead. Showing traffic was quite down here in Windsor. Just our Monday and our Wednesday meetings here in Windsor and Kingsville and Leamington, open house traffic just up like crazy. Now I don't know if that's just because March break was 3 weeks ago and now all of a sudden interest rates are advertised below 4%. Is it just the normal spring market, or is consumer sentiment finally starting to turn and it's going to be spring as normal here? How is that lining up with what you're hearing from other industry professionals?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's spring's going to be normal, unfortunately, until we get some resolution around these trade tariffs, and that's
Okay.
may not be for a little while. Um, But I do think you're seeing the lows in sentiment right now. So I would not be surprised if you started to see at least a marginal improvement in sales. But where I think you're going to start to see it more is come the back half of the year. You'll see it. Those sales are going to perk up considerably compared to 2024 levels. But for the next couple months, it's hard to see things just really perking up, just given just how uncertain the whole global economy and geopolitics are at the moment.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast here. If people want to follow you online, where's the best place to do it? Is it X? Is it on your website? Sign up for your subscription, obviously, or how do people follow what you're working on, Ben?
Sure. You can follow me on X. You may not like what I post all sorts of stuff, so you're welcome to follow it, but be prepared. So it's at Ben Rabidoux. But if you're in the real estate space, and you do have to be in the real estate space, so you have to have a verifiable professional email to sign up, but you can check us out at edgeanalytics.ca. I'll give you a discount code for your listeners. So normally it's $50 a month, but we do have promos periodically, and right now you can sign up using the discount code OG-30, and you get $30 a month to sign up for Edge Analytics. You can check it out for a month. If it's not your cup of tea, we're pretty easy to fire. So you can cancel, your credit card won't get billed. But our experience is generally people find a lot of value in it if they're in the real estate space.
Awesome. And for anybody that's in Southwestern Ontario, we're lucky enough to have Ben coming to visit us in Windsor towards the end of May. So get in contact with me if you'd like to get a ticket to come see him in person. And Ben, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today and share all your wisdom and knowledge with us.
Thanks, Cody. Appreciate it and look forward to seeing you in person in May.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the show, folks. Please keep in mind that this show is not offering legal, financial, or accounting advice, but rather opinions and experiences in the world of real estate from the host and the guests. If you're enjoying the show, please rate, review, and share with your friends and colleagues. And if you think that there's someone that needs to be on this show, please feel free to connect them with me. Or if there's a topic that should be discussed, feel free to let me know. Thank you so much, and bye for now.